Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, we're continuing our Evil Elite series where I'll show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. The Great Awakening continues and it seems to be accelerating. And I want to talk about the importance of Ian Carroll going on Joe Rogan this week and breaking down so many of these conspiracy theories that have now proven to be true. So obviously Joe Rogan, one of the biggest podcasts in the world, this is going to get millions of views. Ian rose to fame, breaking down a lot of these conspiracies in the background, and more people are joining the dots and doing their own research, which is fantastic to see. So they spoke about a number of topics. Watch the full thing if you haven't already. It's actually surprising that this is on all these big platforms without any censorship, considering the level of detail they went into and who's really behind a lot of this stuff, particularly with the Epstein saga, which I can continue to talk about being the absolute key to exposing the global cabal. So they also got into 9/11 and the dancing Israelis, which we'll talk to, and who's really pulling the strings of our elites. One of the other topics they got into was all these WikiLeaks emails, John Podesta, Obama, the Clintons, all the stuff I've covered on the channel plenty of times now, and just talking about how you can, a lot of this stuff that has been scrubbed from the internet, it's still out there and you can still find it. But this is really sick stuff that was just out there in the public a few years ago until people started looking. It wasn't only, Joe Rogan's podcast. It was Candace Owens, Theo Von, a number of big influencers are all now confidently coming out and talking about this topic openly, which used to get you scrubbed from the internet, and talking about how Israel, who is behind a lot of this stuff, has become a safe haven for pedos. So these sick people commit these crimes across the world, and then if it looks like they're going to be caught, they go to Israel and they're protected and can't be brought to justice. And people are just shocked when they hear this type of stuff. This is Benjamin Netanyahu back in 1980 talking about how we own the Senate, we own the Congress, and I've spoken about AIPAC and the Jewish lobby influence on American politics, but all politics globally as they continue to overthrow governments. And this is 45 years ago. And people are working out that if the same cabal has been behind all of these atrocities, just think about how long this has been going on and how many, all the money that's been wasted and the innocent lives that have been lost as they've used, they've weaponized the media to turn people against each other, all this division, make the wrong guys the enemies, fund both sides of wars, and roll out this master plan of theirs, which we'll get to. But thankfully, we do have plenty of good people. And as I said, the Great Awakening is continuing. People like Thomas Massey proposing a bill to end the Fed. The whole purpose of this channel was to talk about, Bitcoin and the evil of the banking system, the Rothschilds and all that, how they create debt slaves, whether it's on an individual level or country level, just putting people into debt. So this is great to see Thomas Massey pushing to end the Fed, but sure enough, straight away, the Israel lobby got to work with these preemptive war against Thomas Massey. And this is their playbook. They try and discredit people, cancel them, and so on. The connection here between Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's partner, and her father, who was a known Israeli Mossad operative, and people are saying, well, why am I just hearing about this for the first time? The connection to Mother Teresa here. I've spoken about how the Vatican is going to be one of the next pillars to fall and be exposed with everything that's coming out, and the connections with all the child trafficking and think about all the fines that the Vatican's has got over the years, and all these Catholic priests doing these disgusting things. It's all finally coming out, and people are going to realize the connections to this cabal network and the other individuals involved. If you're not familiar with the dancing Israelis and what happened in 9/11, it was a group that was set up recording the Twin Towers being hit before it actually happened and then celebrating. So they had some foreknowledge that this was going to occur. Now, at the time, this was the head of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, and he had, these ties to these Israelis and these Zionists, and he was the one that let them go. The FBI actually caught these people, and then they were let go. They went back to Israel and even gave interviews at the time about everything that happened. More and more people joining these dots of what's really going on with the greater Israel plan to take over the surrounding countries and expand. And this is a good speech here by Avi Shlamp, an Israeli historian. And it's important to realize that a lot of Jewish people and Israeli people are actually waking up to how evil their leaders are. And this is why they try and hide behind this shield of anti-Semitism. And as I've said so many times, it's like talking about the bad things that Aussie politicians are doing doesn't mean you hate Aussies or you're racist against Aussies. You have to realize it's these evil people at the top that are pulling the strings, and this is how they've got away with it, just saying, oh, that's anti-Semitic, to point out some of the stuff that they're doing. Now, really disappointing to see that, as I said, the Greater Israel plan to take over all these neighboring countries, and we now see this going on in Syria, and we're starting to see these videos and reports of mass slaughterings of Christians and this type of thing. And people don't realize that Assad, as Tucker's talking about here, was kind of protecting these minority groups. The US and Israel get what they want, overthrow these different leaders. We saw Assad was forced out, and now, sure enough, the same thing is happening here that's happened everywhere else in the Middle East, where the evil elites fund these different radical groups to use that as the excuse of, oh, we have to go to war. See, there's these terrorists over there. This is the plan, how they get away with it. And then they just capture more land, bomb everyone like we've seen in Gaza, commit genocide, and then take it over. It was good to see Chinese Foreign Minister coming out and saying Gaza belongs to the Palestinian people. Not many people in the US are obviously taking that stance. And there's a reason why ISIS never attacks Israel, because they're sponsored by Israel and the CIA. Some people even speculate that ISIS stands for the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. So this is some breaking news about Netanyahu being exposed to funding Hamas. Like I just described, they fund the opposition, aggravate them, and then go in. And this was the excuse, to enable the war that's gone on for over a year now. And this was coming out from Israeli intelligence agent Shin Bet as well. So like I said, people on the inside are actually exposing this as well. But let's get to what's going on in the US. And, so disappointing that we haven't got the Epstein list or basically anything yet. And I covered that a bit last week. But now we see Pam Bondi coming out and saying Israel is our greatest ally in the world, when we know that the whole Epstein list was going to expose the Israeli Mossad Epstein connections. And instead of worrying about the Epstein files, she, again, is now towing this line of anti-Semitism and how they're going to crack down on it in colleges or whatever, while Trump's, on one hand, promising to return free speech, and on the other hand, cracking down on this issue. It's just, polar opposites here. And as this tweet sums up perfectly, can anyone explain to me how exposing these global pedophile and child trafficking networks is considered a national security concern? And because it's going to expose all these elite people that were in on it. And more of these brave survivors like Annika Lucas have been coming out and telling their stories. And a lot of these people have got so much knowledge because they grew up in these cult Illuminati families, and they get told the global agenda. And so some of these podcasts are fascinating to listen to. These people that underwent mind control, all the MK Ultra stuff, a lot of abuse to fragment their mind and to get them, not questioning things and just thinking this is normal because that's what they grow up with. So, these people are so brave, and have a listen to some of those interviews if you haven't already. So Dan Bongino also coming out talking about Israel being the greatest ally and their top priority. This is just such a joke to see this stuff happening when everyone thought we were so close to actually getting the truth. RFK Jr., again, I feel like we're just watching a movie play out, because how these people are making these statements just all of a sudden on the same day, on the same week that Rogan and Ian Carroll exposed the truth, but then you've got all the people in the highest positions of power just being appointed by Trump flip-flopping to make this the most important issue and talking about how this is making America healthy again. Like, what's this got to do with health? And RFK, that was meant to be cracking down on all the vaccines and all the corruption of big pharma. Where are these people's priorities and focus? Just does your head in, really. Makes you wonder what's really going on. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who said he was stepping down and is still obviously in power. I'm not sure what's happened there, but he's saying openly here that they're proud to call themselves a Zionists, and just really putting it out there to the public that they're all part of this cabal and this New World Order Agenda 2030 to roll out these plans. Over in Britain now, you'll get arrested for waving your flag in the streets. New laws being passed today is making minorities are going to get lesser sentences than white British people. And we'll get into why this is all happening, but this is the sort of insanity that is causing the global awakening. People everywhere going, how on earth can any common sense, sane person explain why we're doing this to our own citizens and prioritizing others when all the stats show that, all the crime and the destruction of society is coming from a lot of these immigrants that are often radicalized and funded by these NGOs to cause chaos and break down the fabric of society. So over to the UK, where they're now talking about sending troops and possibly even conscription to go fight this war, now that we've got a bit of a peace deal between the US and Russia in terms of what's happening in Ukraine. Now Europe's gearing up for war. So they've just passed the baton from one to another. And as people are saying here, who on earth is going to want to go and fight this war for BlackRock when we know all the money laundering that's been happening in Ukraine, how that's really a hub for the child trafficking and all the biolabs. It's all out there now, guys, in those public USAID documents. And as I said, people are finally waking up to all these connections here. And this is exactly the same in Australia. You've got to remember with the Five Eyes Alliance and AUKUS and everything, Australia is just an elbow, just puppets for these globalists. So, no coincidence that Albo comes out a day or two later and says, Australia is open to sending troops. And as I said here, I don't know how many Aussies are going to be keen to go fight and die for the cabal's agenda in some region that most Aussies couldn't really point to on a map. So over to France now. Emmanuel Macron is talking about how now Russia poses a huge threat to all of Europe and, really drumming up the fear and all this stuff that they love to keep the average person, worried in that state of fear. And really talking about how Russia is to blame here and they're going to manipulate these elections in Romania that we've seen recently, and it's a threat to all of Europe, just absolute BS. Thankfully, there's some leaders in Europe that are awake to all this and calling it out and saying, yeah, absolutely, you can go, but we're not sending any of our, young men and women to die. And don't forget, in Romania, they're cracking down completely with all this internet censorship and blocking any sites that are telling the truth about the overthrow and what really happened in those elections there that I've covered with Georgescu, who was going to expose all this stuff, and he was winning the election before they paused it and said it was Russian interference. But Macron went a step further to actually say that we're prepared to protect our European allies with the French nuclear weapons. And this is just absolute insanity that we're even talking about using nukes in this modern day and age, once you know what's really going on. And don't forget that this is just a week after Candace Owens did this brilliant series exposing Bridget Macron as being born a biological male, transitioning when she was around 30, this age gap when he was 14 and she was 40 when they just met, and all this sick stuff that's really going on. And instead of suing her and saying, well, none of that's true, instead they've just trying to get these clips removed and these episodes removed from TikToks and other socials. So I'm continuing to watch this saga play out in real time, but this is just absolutely fascinating stuff that they're not pushing back against anything she said. Just on this subject, we know the elites are pushing this whole transgender ideology heavily on our kids, and I've spoken about this before, but this is one of the biggest studies we've had today, clearly showing that people that get brainwashed into thinking, I'll be happier if I get these hormones pumped into me and, sex changes, surgical operations, whatever, mutilated. These people all come out feeling depressed, more anxious, all these negative outcomes that you're not going to hear about in the mainstream because it's become another source of profit for Big Pharma. Now, I want to talk about this whole globalist cabal and what we're seeing with immigration, whatever. It's all part of this great replacement theory where they're literally trying to get rid of white people. And we see it with the race mixing, and you can read about it in this UN report that's literally on their website. And this is exactly what we've seen in Europe. It's starting to happen in Australia. Australia was a pretty happy multicultural place for a while, but now we're starting to get, the radicalized groups, and we're starting to see the violent crime rise in the areas where these people have come. And as Tucker says, and I've pointed this out before, where for white people that have their home and places they live, where is it safe for them to live now when all these other places, no one's allowed in Israel apart from Israelis. China's not trying to import heaps of white people and black people or whatever ethnicities to make it more equal. It's only these globalists that are trying to do this in the West to white countries. British MP Andrew Bridgen, he's fantastic. He's been speaking out openly against all the child trafficking, and he's now really ramped it up and openly speaking about how the elites feel they don't need 90% of us anymore. This depopulation agenda around pandemics, wars, famines, vaccines. People are waking up to all of this. Now, I think this is going to change, and we are going to. There's too many people that are awake now. And as I said, if it's on the biggest podcast in the world, it's getting out there to the masses. So I think we are in for a bit of a rough time in the short term. But as I've said, I think once everyone's awake, we're going to head into this golden age where instead of the 99% fighting over the 1%, that the elites own 99% of the wealth, it's going to be redistributed. All the resources, food, wealth, land, property taxes, all this BS that's kept everyone suppressed for so long. It's going to be a great time once we just get rid of all this evil and corruption at government level. So stick in there, guys. I do think that this story all has a happy ending. People have been calling out this great replacement immigration theory and the globalist agenda to destroy the West for a long time now. This is a speech from Robert Welch back in 1974, but you can go back a lot further. And World War I and II, and really understanding what happened there versus what we're being told. And everyone knows, oh yeah, the victors, the winners write history. But no one ever thinks, well, the world is in such chaos today. Maybe the bad guys won World War II in secret. And we know all those, Nazi scientists that got shipped back to the US and got into positions of power in the CIA, NASA. We're going to get into some of the space stuff that was mentioned on Rogan as well in a second. But General Patton here, after the war, literally said, I think we fought for the wrong side. That's coming from the top. And it's really important to understand why you need to understand what happened with World War II and how the Rothschilds banking family, part of the cabal, set up Israel. It's all connected. So, this is really important to understand with everything that's happening and being exposed now about Israel. It isn't the initial Israel that's described in ancient or older, religious texts and that type of thing. Now, if you want to go back even further to a lot of our history that's been rewritten and lied about, the My Lunch Break channel on Rumble and different platforms has done some great work. And if you haven't been down the Tartaria rabbit hole and all these old maps up until around the 1600s that show this Russian region being labelled as Tartaria and this empire that we're not told about that's covered up in history, and all of these buildings that we're told are, a lot of people have their theories around the pyramids and stuff, but this is more recent history than that. And some of these mud floods and resets and buildings that are still around today that he's been doing some great work on, showing that the official stories of who built them and the timelines and all that are just complete lies. So check that out, or if you haven't already. And I think this is another one of those big pillars that's going to fall in the coming weeks, months. I think this year is the year that most people are going to wake up to all this stuff. So there's more good people that have been trying to expose all of this throughout the years. Seth Rich, many suspect he was one of the WikiLeaks sources before they killed him that really exposed everything happening with those leaked emails and this conspiracy, some of these words that I can't say due to the algorithm, but check those docos out if you haven't already. But Avicii, Chester Bedingfield, Anthony Bourdain, Chris Cornell of Audio Slave, all these people were working on these documentaries, trying to expose the child trafficking in different countries, what was going on in the music industry, Hollywood, some of the things that they saw and witnessed, and sure enough, they were all whacked as well by the cabal. I think one of the next things that people are going to discover or start to talk about, most people are awake now to everything around COVID, scandemic, and how that all played out. But this, I think a lot of people haven't connected these dots yet, that Benjamin Netanyahu was the first person to go on TV and get the Pfizer vaccine. Then all the initial studies and all that data that came out was from Israel. So they were the first country to reach 90% vaccination rate, even getting boosted before other countries had started rolling out their vaccine programs. And all the studies that came out of Israel saying, yeah, it's safe, it's effective, a 96% reduction, all that stuff that ended up being complete lies. And this was pushed by these same people that people waking up to were behind all these other mass casualty events throughout history. So RFK Jr. actually said this as well a while back. I know he's just taken this new anti-Semitism stance this week, which is taken a lot of people off guard. But this is talking about how COVID-19 was targeting Caucasians and black people, and it was actually these Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese that seem to be most immune from it, which is another interesting angle as well, tying that all together. But let's get back to some of the positives. So this is the mRNA vaccinations for the chicken supply and all this new scare tactics around the bird flu and why there's no eggs on the shelf, which is all, again, just complete BS once you look into it. But RFK actually came out, and this is really positive. Some people being critical of him for not pushing back on us, but all these major 3 health agencies in the US just yesterday actually have recommended against the use of this bird flu vaccine, and talking about how you create these mutant factories. And if you speak to these organic farmers, they say that whenever there's an illness, you keep the birds that have immunity, and then that goes into the next generation. And so again, this is the scientists all coming out and saying, as my friend Dr. Julie Sladden points out here, they're swabbing these chickens with these PCR tests that are wildly inaccurate, and then going, oh yeah, just like during COVID, everyone doing these swab tests, showing false positives and whatever. And this is how we're diagnosing and justifying, killing millions of chickens, and now people can't get eggs. And I think we're going to see, the actual supply of chicken as meat as well start to dwindle if they're going to continue to push this agenda. Okay, so this is all part of, the World Economic Forum, all these NGOs that are trying to get us away from eating meat, one of the healthiest things that you can eat. And talking about wanting here that he wants to genetically modify humans to become allergic to meat, just absolute insanity, these ideas that these people come up with. And all part of this agenda to finally control what we do eat with digital ID, and maybe even chipping us all, as Elon's pushing Neuralink. But this was a lady in China just showing this clip where without a digital ID, even though she had gift cards and money, you can't even buy anything now in China. And so trying to get food or pay for your rent or public transport or whatever, if you're not going to sign up with digital ID, facial recognition, you're not going to be able to do anything. And that was kind of the test run that they showed us in COVID with the vaccine passports and whatnot. And make no mistake, this is all coming to the rest of the world unless we wake enough people up in time. This is in the US, where New York residents or Amish communities are now being forced to receive vaccinations against their religious beliefs and just the way of life that they've had for a long time. And I've covered these population studies with these Amish children that don't get vaccinated, eat healthy food, are some of the most healthy in the world. And we should be studying these people as a control group versus why is autism, ADHD, autoimmune disease, everything else just rampant in all these other children that aren't living a similar lifestyle to these people. So this is really sad to see. And this is how they trap people. Think about in the West, you're not allowed to send your kids to school unless they get all the 75 vaccines that are now on the schedule. Parents need to stand up and start pushing back against all of this. Another good win, though, this is DeSantis permanently banning all mRNA vaccines in Florida. So no one should be forced to take it against your will. We need to see this extended to our food supply as well as humans. Otherwise, it's going to end up in your system either way. All right, so let's get into a lot of the stuff that's happening in Australia. Senator Jared Rennick seems to be one of the best ones now at calling out all this BS. So good on him. And he's talking about this 3-part investigation into how deeply all these intelligence agencies have infiltrated the media in the West. And we've got Billboard Chris coming over here. This is going to be a landmark case again in terms of free speech and fighting this in court against the e-safety commissioner and ordering down censorship of these different posts and whatever. So I'm looking forward to watching this play out. And don't forget, Candace Owens is also in a legal battle in Australia. But why aren't the real issues being talked about? So 100,000 long-term arrivals in February after we've had, more than 1 million people come in the past 18 months during a housing crisis. Why is Albo doing this and allowing this? No one voted for it. 50% of all new jobs last year were in the NDIS. 20% of Australians are now disabled. And in some communities, it's more than 50%. And we're hearing stories of these, a lot of the times it's these immigrant families that come over say all their kids are ADHD, and they've got, large amounts of children that are all just on the NDIS being funded by Australian taxpayers for these, different people that have been let in. Now, even if it's not just those ethnic communities and immigrants, whatever, the fact that we've got this number of people that's now been paid by taxpayers is insane. And the wastage, we know it. I think the baseline salary is $70 an hour, and you talk to people that work in this industry, and a lot of them say that, they're just watching kids play video games, or, just taking people for a walk or whatever. Just crazy compared to other cultures like in the East, where, the family looks after the elderly, and the community and that sort of thing all look after each other. Whereas in Australia and the West, part of this agenda to bankrupt everyone is, getting taxpayers to pay for all this stuff and get us all in debt as quickly as possible. This is Matt Barry talking about how Australia stands with, we've seen Peter Dutton and Albo come out and voice their support for Ukraine and Israel. But don't forget, if they're going to take that stance with Ukraine, we're the largest buyer of Russian oil. So again, this is going to skyrocket energy prices in Australia when we've already have some of the most expensive energy in the world, when we should be a resource-rich, energy-abundant, low-cost energy country. We keep hearing about all the anti-Semitism attacks and stuff in the news, but there's so many more important issues happening that our leaders should be really focused on if they genuinely cared about Australians. All these things that are bankrupting the country that I've just mentioned, they're going to start attacking inheritance as well. This is an article, is it ethical for the rich to leave money to their kids? All these different attack vectors to try and take away the hard-earned wealth and freedom of different people. The cultural attack on our society that I've spoken about. So as Mount Panorama, whether or not you love your car racing, this is a bit of an iconic Australian tradition. And now we've got these claims that it's, sacred land or whatever. At a time when we're seeing this sort of stuff happening in Sydney Mardi Gras, and I'm sure that, genuine spiritual, traditional Aboriginal people are just disgusted to see this sort of stuff happening. And again, it goes to this theme that we've seen about anti-Christianity, anti-white, that the globalists are really pushing. Okay, so let's get to some weather modification stuff. A lot of people still don't believe that this is true with the geoengineering and chemtrails and all that. We now have 24 states in the US that have fought to ban the geoengineering that's going on. So this is absolutely real. This has been on TV in Australia. And I don't want to talk about the storm, the cyclone in Brisbane, because in the end, that was a bit of a non-event. And you just think about all the fear that was ramped up in the lead up to that. So obviously, stay safe if you're being affected. And I'm sure there's still wind and rain, and going to be some minor disruptions and whatnot. But that was just one. It really feels like that was one big fear scare event. We heard again that the supermarket shelves were empty and all that type of thing. Okay, so people are waking up to the fact that all this climate crisis is just one big money laundering scheme, and the real climate crisis is geoengineering. And as I've spoken about, it's more environmentalism, all the toxins that big corporations are pouring into the environment. Meanwhile, they're trying to push the carbon credit and all these big companies that buy up carbon credits, which are just, these synthetic financial derivatives created by BlackRock and the like, that don't really do anything to address the true pollution that is ruining our environment. Thankfully, we see more and more people turning against this lab-grown meat, fake lab-grown human breast milk, and these just crazy companies that are all tied to these NGOs and Bill Gates. And Biomilk's actually filed for bankruptcy. So this is where you have the power as a consumer to start buying organic food, organic meat. Stop playing into the hands of the cabal, because, organic farmers will start to produce more food. Go to the farmers market, they'll bring more in. This is where we need to get back to growing food locally in healthy ways that aren't all genetically modified and sprayed with all Monsanto's latest poisons. This was an amazing video. If you haven't seen this is on YouTube, and this is a study into the telepathic, the sixth sense, and all these extra abilities of non-verbal autistic kids. Absolutely mind-blowing stuff. So if you haven't seen this already, go check this out, guys. And if you want to do more research on any of these tweets, you can go to these people's profiles and then search their account for the specific tweet, read all the comments, start to look into this more. All right, so some of the last things I wanted to touch on here was Rogan and Ian Carroll discussing all this NASA fakery. And if you haven't been down this rabbit hole before, there's so many instances of NASA being caught using Photoshop, but particularly a lot of these clips where astronauts are supposedly, weightless, non-gravity in space and being caught using harnesses and wires, the CGI, the green screens glitching out. These astronauts, these women with their hair gelled all up frizzy, going in all directions to try and portray that they're in anti-gravity climate. So, people have long been looking into stuff like, was the moon landing fake? And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that there is some fakery going on. But this was amazing to see that this is coming to the forefront of this discussion, all the NASA fakery. And we just saw Starship 8 blow up. So this is 2 of Elon's flights now that have blown up. And the story that the mainstream reported here was that this is going to cause a delay in the flights to, colonizing the moon and Mars. And just remember that every president since the 90s has said, we're going back to the moon soon. And there's always a delay and an excuse. And so people are starting to wake up and ask, well, hold on, we went to the moon in the 60s. Why did they lose the tapes of the most important event in human history? Why do they say they lost the technology and we can't get back there in an age of supercomputers and AI? None of this adds up. So guys, I hope you're enjoying this video series. Please share these around with other people that you believe need to wake up and hear these messages. Leave a comment and I'll talk to you again soon. There's so much happening. It's such an exciting time and it's just amazing to watch the Great Awakening continue. Cheers, guys.